In 1992, a taxi driver kissed his wife goodbye, waved to his son through the window, and drove off to work. He never came home, and for 20 years, no one knew why. But the answer was sitting 40 feet underwater, waiting. Before we get to the cab at the bottom of the bay, you need to understand who Frank Delgado was, because that's what makes this story hurt. Frank Delgado wasn't the kind of man who made headlines. He didn't chase danger or stir drama. He drove a taxi, rain or shine, 7 days a week. From the heart of downtown San Diego to the far corners of the bay. A husband to Rosa, father to 2 kids, and a familiar face to anyone who'd ever needed a ride after midnight. Frank was steady, soft-spoken, and predictable in all the ways that make someone easy to forget. Until they disappear. May 16, 1992 was supposed to be just another shift. He did everything right that evening, every single thing, and it still cost him his life. He kissed Rosa on the cheek around 4:45 p.m., grabbed his thermos and leather driver's log, and stepped out the front door of their modest 2-bedroom home in Logan Heights. Their youngest, Daniel, waved from the window. Frank waved back. There was nothing unusual, no sign, no warning, just a man heading to work like he always did. He clocked in at the yellow cab depot on Broadway and picked up his car, cab number 157, a Marigold 1987 Chevrolet Caprice. He refueled at the Arco off Market Street and took his usual route down toward the waterfront. His dispatcher logged his first fare at 6:12 p.m., an airport drop-off near Harbor Drive. From there, the calls came in steadily. By 10:40 p.m., he'd completed 6 rides and was heading back toward downtown. Then came the call that changed everything. At 11:08 p.m., he radioed in for a pickup. Outside the Black Coral, a local bar not far from the Embarcadero. That was the last time anyone heard his voice. By sunrise, Frank's cab hadn't returned to the depot. Dispatch tried to reach him. No response. Rosa called the police at 9:17 a.m. He never stayed out, she said. He always came home. For a while, no one panicked. Cabs broke down. Drivers got sick. Maybe he was stuck in Tijuana without signal. Maybe the car had been stolen and abandoned. But as the hours turned into days and the silence deepened, something became terrifyingly clear. Frank Delgado, a man of routine, had vanished without leaving a single trace, and whatever happened to him that night in 1992 was far from ordinary. There was exactly one moment captured on camera that night. One. And even that was barely enough. At 11:14 p.m. on May 16, 1992, a grainy security camera mounted above the front door of the Black Coral captured the final moments anyone would see of Frank Delgado. The footage, preserved on a battered VHS tape, shows his cab pulling up under the buzzing neon sign of the bar. A figure steps forward, a man in a dark windbreaker, ball cap low over his face. He opens the rear door and climbs inside without hesitation. Frank shifts into drive, turns onto Harbor Drive, and disappears into the night. That was it. No plate number, no clear face, no name. Just a man in a windbreaker. And then nothing. No license plate from the passenger's car, no clear shot of his face, no conversation captured, just a quiet moment frozen in static-filled footage. A simple transaction that turned into a mystery spanning decades. The passenger was never identified. No one remembered calling a cab. Bartenders didn't recognize the man. Regulars couldn't place him. He wasn't a local. Police distributed the image citywide, then statewide. Composite sketches were drafted and redrafted, but the leads ran dry almost immediately. Whoever the man was, he knew how to vanish too. Then detectives found something that should have been unremarkable. But it wasn't. Investigators reviewed Frank's logs. He had recorded every fare that night, except this one. That final entry was blank. Dispatch had no phone record of the ride either. It wasn't a scheduled pickup. Someone flagged him down, a walk-up. The kind drivers are trained to be wary of. What made Frank stop for this one? The waterfront was quiet that night, the fog rolling in from the Pacific in thick, low sheets. Streetlights cast halos through the mist. The area wasn't dangerous per se, but it wasn't without its ghosts. Dock workers, drifters, sailors between ships. Everyone had a story. Most didn't end like this. 2 days later, they found cab number 157. And what was inside it, or rather, what wasn't, chilled every detective on the scene. When Frank's cab was found 2 days later, abandoned in a marina parking lot, his keys were gone. The driver's seat had been pushed far back, as if someone taller had sat there. The glove box had been opened, its contents rifled through. There were no fingerprints, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just silence. Years later, detectives would still call it one of the most frustratingly clean disappearances they'd ever seen. No motive, no trail, just a man in a windbreaker and a taxi swallowed by the dark. In the bustling city of San Diego, Frank Delgado was a man of routine, a dedicated cab driver, known for his reliability. He always checked in with dispatch, but on one fateful night, after 11:14 p.m., an unsettling silence fell. Dispatchers, accustomed to minor glitches, initially dismissed it. Perhaps a dead battery, they thought, or a quick coffee break. They couldn't have known this silence would mark the beginning of a chilling mystery. As the hours ticked by, Frank's cab, number 157, failed to return to the depot. Concern began to mount. Dispatchers tried calling Frank directly, then broadcasted over shared frequencies, but received no reply. Other drivers were asked to keep an eye out, to no avail. Frank Delgado had vanished. Meanwhile, at home, Frank's wife, Rosa, had been awake all night. A deep sense of dread gnawed at her. At 8:46 a.m., she called dispatch, her voice steady but laced with fear. Frank hadn't come home, his pillow untouched. By 9:17 a.m., Rosa was filing a missing persons report with the San Diego police. The officer asked routine questions about stress or arguments, but Rosa calmly denied them all. Frank would never abandon his family. Police began their search, canvassing the downtown area. A few cabbies remembered seeing Frank earlier that night, but no one recalled the passenger, who entered his cab outside the Black Coral, and no one had seen Frank since. The painful suggestion that Frank might have left voluntarily was met with Rosa's fierce rejection. She knew her husband. Detectives delved into Frank's life. His financials showed no activity, no border crossings, no criminal record. The theory of a secret life or stress from bills was proposed. But Rosa presented powerful counter-evidence. Frank's shaving kit, his cherished watch, which he never took off, sitting on the kitchen counter. These were not the actions of a man planning to disappear. Days later, a patrolman on a routine loop made a discovery. Cab number 157, Frank's cab, was found parked crookedly at Shelter Island Marina. It appeared abandoned, its once vibrant paint dulled by salt air. A hubcap missing. The patrolman identified it by the medallion number stenciled on its side. A crucial piece of the puzzle had emerged. The cab's interior was eerily still, the front windows slightly cracked. There were no visible signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. Yet, several unsettling details suggested another presence. The keys were gone. The driver's seat was pushed far back, too far for Frank. A crushed coffee cup and a half-smoked cigarette, items Frank never used, lay in the passenger footwell. The glove box had been rifled through. Frank's logbook was missing, and his dashboard flashlight was gone. Most chillingly, the back seat belt was stretched and locked, as if someone had ridden there and never unbuckled. A faint, musty, decaying smell lingered inside. Forensics dusted the cab for prints, finding nothing, suggesting it was wiped down or exposed to the elements. The marina was not on Frank's known routes, not near his last fare and not near his home. There were no cameras nearby. The cab simply appeared at the location. Detectives were chilled not by what was in the cab, but by what wasn't. Frank Delgado was gone, and the cab was just the first clue. Investigators initially considered obvious possibilities: robbery gone wrong or a planned disappearance. For robbery, Frank's wallet was left at home. His cash float gone, but no signs of violence or struggle. The scene was too clean. Then there was the theory of voluntary departure. Frank was behind on bills, with 2 kids and a second mortgage. But Rosa strongly refuted this. She emphasized his reliability and commitment to his family. Frank Delgado was not a man who would simply walk away. The mystery of his disappearance deepened, leaving behind a trail of unsettling clues and a family desperate for answers. What truly happened to Frank Delgado? When a cab driver vanishes in the middle of the night, investigators don't start with the extraordinary. They begin with the expected: robbery, personal crisis, a planned disappearance. Frank Delgado's case at first looked like one of those. Detectives built their initial theory around two possibilities. The first, a robbery gone wrong. Cab drivers were easy targets, isolated, often cash-heavy, frequently operating in shadows. Maybe Frank picked up the wrong fare. Maybe he resisted. But when the cab was recovered, that theory began to buckle. Frank's wallet had been left behind at home. His cash float was gone, but there was no sign of violence, no broken window, no weapon, no struggle. If it was a robbery, it was strangely clean. Too clean, so investigators turned to their second option, the one that would haunt Rosa for years. Maybe he left voluntarily. Frank had been behind on bills. 2 kids, 1 income, second mortgage. It was enough to make anyone feel trapped. Maybe he saw a way out. Maybe he took it. But Rosa pushed back hard. Frank had never once talked about running. He was a man who showed up, to work, to family dinners. He was the anchor, not the type to cut the rope. Investigators dug into bank records, passport activity, phone calls. Nothing. His last withdrawal was a routine $20 from a corner ATM. No plane tickets, no border crossing. His passport hadn't left the drawer. One officer told a local paper, if someone wanted to vanish, they'd do it just like this. But behind the scenes, the detectives quietly began circling a third theory. One far worse than robbery, one far worse than running. Someone didn't rob Frank, and he didn't run. Someone made him disappear. Rosa Delgado had never wanted to speak to the media, but 5 days after Frank vanished, she stood in front of a camera, and what she said changed everything. Rosa was quiet by nature. She preferred church potlucks and evenings on the porch with her children. But 5 days after Frank vanished, she stood in front of a news camera with her wedding ring clenched tight in her palm, and tears refusing to fall. My husband didn't leave us, she said. If you know anything at all, please come forward. Our children are waiting for their father. The clip aired on every local station that evening. Her voice didn't tremble. It carried the weight of certainty, the kind only someone truly in love can possess, the kind that refuses to let doubt in. That broadcast changed everything. Up until that moment, Frank's disappearance was just another line item in a growing list of open cases. But Rosa's plea struck a nerve. Viewers called in, retired dock workers, bar patrons, a couple who thought they'd seen Frank's cab driving oddly near Shelter Island the night he vanished. Flyers began appearing on telephone poles and bus stops. Frank's face, tired but warm, mid-smile, looked out across San Diego like a ghost, refusing to fade. Volunteers joined search parties. Local pastors mentioned his name in prayer. Kids at the elementary school made cards for Mr. Delgado's family. A missing persons vigil was held at the waterfront, just a mile from where his cab was found. Dozens came. Some held candles, others held hands. Rosa stood at the edge of the marina and stared into the black water. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. But while the community held candles, the investigation was quietly running out of road. Reporters pressed authorities for updates. Why no suspects? Why no public statement? Authorities offered boilerplate answers. Ongoing investigation, following leads. But behind the scenes, pressure was mounting. They hadn't found Frank, and they hadn't found anything that made sense. In the weeks after Rosa's plea, tips came in fast, some heartfelt, some bizarre, and one much darker than the rest. A man swore he saw Frank crossing the border into Tijuana with a duffel bag. A bartender in Ensenada said he served a quiet cabbie who matched Frank's photo. A hotel clerk in La Paz claimed a guest used a fake name but looked just like the guy on TV. Police followed every lead, called every number, knocked on every door. But nothing held. Then came something darker. A rumor began spreading through the waterfront community. A rumor that, if true, would explain everything. The clean cab, the missing logbook, the abandoned marina. A rumor that Frank had been caught in the crosshairs of a drug run gone bad. That maybe his final fare wasn't just a customer, but a courier trying to vanish. That Frank saw or heard something he shouldn't have. One tipster claimed Frank's cab was used to deliver a package to a docked fishing boat, then never seen again. Another said the cab had been spotted near a warehouse, long rumored to move more than just cargo. None of it stuck. No hard evidence. No names. Just whispers. And slowly, without fanfare, Frank Delgado's name slipped from the headlines. The detectives drifted. Leads dried up. Patrol cars no longer circled the marina. By late summer of '92, the case had quietly stalled. The file was moved from active to pending. Cold. For Rosa, this felt like betrayal. The city had stopped searching, but she hadn't. The marina had its own set of rules after dark, and the men who worked there, they noticed things they never reported. Until now. The marina had always had its own rhythm, a slow, salt-stained heartbeat beneath everyday life. By day it was sailboats and bait shops, seagulls and sunburns, but after dark it became something else entirely, and the men who worked there noticed things, strange things. One remembered a fishing boat that docked hours after it was scheduled, engines hot, crew silent. Another mentioned lights flickering below deck on vessels with no manifest, no name and no business being there. One dockhand who'd been there that night in May recalled seeing a yellow cab parked near the water around midnight. Didn't think much of it, he said. Figured someone got drunk and left it there. When the story broke that it belonged to a missing man, he stopped talking altogether. And he wasn't the only one. None of them went to the police. Not really. A few dropped anonymous tips. Most stayed quiet. Because in places like this, silence is currency, and asking questions can cost you more than a paycheck. There were whispers about certain docks being used after hours for more than just fishing. Packages offloaded with no paperwork. Blacked out windows on boats that came and went with no names. The marina kept secrets. It always had. And maybe, just maybe, Frank Delgado had seen one too many. But whatever happened on those docks that night wasn't just buried in water. It was buried in silence. For 20 years, every single morning, Rosa Delgado did the same thing. She walked to the front window. She wiped the glass clean. And she waited. Time is supposed to dull the edges. At least that's what people say. That grief becomes manageable. Memories fade, life finds its rhythm again. But for Rosa Delgado, time did nothing but deepen the ache. For 2 decades, she kept Frank's photo in the front window of their home, a black and white print from their wedding day. His smile soft, his tie crooked, one hand gently resting on her shoulder. It wasn't a dramatic photo. It was real. It was him. She never declared him dead. She never changed the locks. She never sold the cab driver's hat hanging by the door. Their sons, Daniel and Elias, grew up and moved away. Started families of their own. They wanted her to come live with them. She declined. She had to be there, in case he came home. In 2012, a local journalist revisiting cold cases sat with Rosa in her kitchen. The place hadn't changed much since the 90s. The same floral tablecloth. The same ceramic sugar jar Frank had once knocked over trying to swat a fly. When the reporter asked why she hadn't given up, Rosa stared out the window and said softly, "Because I still feel him." It wasn't denial. It was devotion. And that interview? It triggered something that would crack the case wide open. When the cold case unit reopened Frank's file in 2012, they didn't find a man who had run. They found something far more chilling. A man who had simply ceased to exist. By 2012, nearly every part of Frank Delgado's life had stopped moving, except for the questions. The cold case unit reopened his file after Rosa's interview caught regional attention. Detectives began pulling old records, DMV, banking, Social Security. The data didn't just suggest absence. It suggested something more chilling. Frank's driver's license had expired in 1996. It was never renewed. His bank account told the same story. One small withdrawal on May 15, 1992. $20 at a gas station ATM. After that, nothing. No withdrawals. No deposits. No activity. The balance never changed. No utilities ever opened in his name. No taxes filed, no loans, no aliases. One detective remarked, "You'd have an easier time tracing someone who moved to the moon. That's what haunted them. Not just that he disappeared, but how? How someone could be erased so cleanly, so surgically, that even modern systems couldn't find a crack. He was still in the system, just not moving. A ghost with a name, a file, and a social security number that hadn't been used in 20 years. Nobody was looking for him. And then someone found him anyway. In 2012, a team of environmental divers went into the bay to clean up trash. Old crab traps, tires, rusted anchors. They weren't looking for Frank Delgado. But the bay had been holding on to him, and it was finally ready to let go. In 2012, a team of environmental divers began a long overdue cleanup project along the marina floor. The divers weren't searching for anything more than trash. They started near Shelter Island. Calm, predictable water. Good visibility. The kind of job that was slow, methodical, and unremarkable. Until it wasn't. It was a Thursday when diver Jonah Lee broke formation during a routine sweep. His sonar had bounced off something large and angular, buried under a thick layer of silt and kelp. It didn't match the profile of a boat or a container. It had sharper edges, manufactured lines. He hovered over it for a moment, then he called it in. "Got something down here. Big metal, boxy, it might be a wreck." It took less than 2 minutes for the shape to become obvious. A door frame, a side mirror, a headlight. Not a boat, a car, and not just any car. A yellow one. They circled slowly, brushing away decades of buildup with gloved hands. Seaweed clung to the roof. A colony of mussels had claimed the hood. But the silhouette was unmistakable. It was a taxi. The front grille bore the faded remains of a medallion number. A plastic partition still separated the front seat from the back. It hadn't just sunk. It had settled, like something placed there on purpose. The divers marked the vehicle and surfaced. Photos were sent to the environmental agency, then routed by chance to a local police analyst familiar with old cold cases. He stared at the image for a long time before pulling a dusty manila file from a bottom drawer. Cab number 157. Frank Delgado. 20 years authorities secured the site within hours. When the forensic team finally opened the doors, what they found inside that cab sent a chill through everyone on scene. The interior of that cab looked like a crime scene frozen in amber. 20 years underwater, and it still told the story. The doors had fused shut from rust and pressure. It took hydraulic spreaders nearly 20 minutes to crack the seal. When they did, a thick, briny smell hit the air. Old leather, something older than rot. Inside, the dashboard was covered in a gray film of algae and dust. The rearview mirror hung loose. The fare meter, waterlogged, was stopped at 320. In the driver's seat, slumped slightly to the left, were human remains. A skeleton still wearing fragments of a collared shirt. Bone-white fingers gripped the steering wheel. A wedding band, dulled but unbroken, clung to one knuckle. On the floorboard sat a cracked ID holder. Inside, a water-warped photograph and a name, Franklin Delgado. The glove box was open. Inside, a few damp receipts, an old pen, a faded map of San Diego, and a children's drawing crudely sketched in crayon. Still readable, a smiling stick figure in front of a yellow cab. "For Dad," written in the corner. Investigators worked in silence. No one made a sound beyond what the job required. Even seasoned detectives stood still for longer than they meant to, staring at the interior like it might speak if they gave it enough time. The body was removed with precision. Every bone documented, every scrap of fabric preserved. The remains were sent to the San Diego County Medical Examiner's office under escort, an honor rarely afforded to someone who had been gone so long. But Frank Delgado wasn't just a missing person anymore. He was evidence, and the confirmation came back within a week. Dental records, a healed fracture on the right forearm, an old injury from a fender bender Rosa had always said scared him more than it should have. The official cause of death, undetermined. Too much time. Too much washed away, but no gunshot wounds. No blunt force trauma the bone could reveal. And yet, something was unmistakably terribly wrong. This wasn't an accident. Frank hadn't simply driven off a pier. Someone had helped him disappear. Within 24 hours of the cab breaking the surface, the story was everywhere. And Rosa Delgado said 5 words that turned a solved mystery into something much bigger. The media didn't take long to catch up. Local stations looped footage of the cab being hoisted from the bay, yellow paint peeling, water dripping from the undercarriage. By the weekend, national outlets had picked it up. Rosa stood on her porch flanked by her 2 sons, now grown men with children of their own. Microphones filled the space where her rose bushes used to be. Reporters asked for details, reactions, emotion. She gave them only truth. "He didn't leave us," she said, calm and unwavering. "Someone put him there." That one sentence changed the tone of the coverage. This wasn't a mystery solved. It was a mystery deepened. Who put Frank Delgado at the bottom of the marina, and why? The community that had once quietly forgotten now leaned in. Former cab drivers spoke out. People who'd once been silent began to talk. San Diego's cold case unit was flooded with calls. And Rosa, she stayed home, watched it all unfold from her living room with the sound turned low. She didn't need the news to tell her what she already knew. Frank had never been lost. He'd been hidden. And now that he'd been found and the people who buried him in silence had something new to fear. The truth was coming up for air. Detectives reopened every old lead. And buried in a faded carbon copy dispatch slip, practically illegible, was a name that had been there the whole time. The moment the forensic report hit the desk of Detective Luis Corral, everything changed. The case was no longer a disappearance. It was a possible homicide. The original case file, yellowed and brittle, was suddenly the center of attention. One name showed up more than once. One lead, always shrugged off as incomplete, suddenly stood out like a flare in the dark. The final fare, the last name in the dispatch log. M. Graves. Back in '92, no one followed up. The system was analog. The log had been scribbled by hand by a now-retired dispatcher who only remembered the call coming in around 11 p.m. No address given, just waterfront. It had been labeled a walk-up fare. That made it unremarkable at the time, but now it was everything. Frank's cab had picked up a man that night. And whoever Monsieur Graves was, he was the last known person to sit in that back seat before the cab, and its driver vanished for 2 decades. Detectives began digging, cross-referencing arrest records, license logs, employee rosters, known aliases, and one name kept circling back: Martin Graves. He'd been arrested in March of '92 for public intoxication and resisting arrest during a bar fight at the Black Coral, the very same bar where Frank had picked up his last fare. Charges dropped. No follow-up. But there he was. Same neighborhood, same timeline, same name. Further digging revealed more. Graves had worked the docks, on and off, cash jobs. A reputation for being angry, paranoid, and just smart enough to stay out of real trouble. He disappeared from San Diego records entirely by late 1993, just a few months after Frank vanished. Old mugshots. Grainy, faded, but they had a profile. 6'2", slender, wore a baseball cap low, fit the general build of the man seen entering Frank's cab in the security footage. No fingerprints. No DNA, no weapon, but a name with a history, a proximity, and a reason to disappear. Martin Graves had been a ghost for nearly 2 decades. Now he was a target. The deeper detectives dug, the clearer it became. Martin Graves wasn't just a name on a dispatch slip. He was a red flag, one that had been waving long before Frank Delgado ever vanished. The breakthrough came from an overlooked arrest record buried in the municipal archives. Graves had been picked up 6 months before Frank disappeared, November 1991, during a federal raid on a downtown warehouse. Part of a multi-agency operation targeting a suspected front for a local crime syndicate with ties to the Baja Corridor. He was released without bail. And then nothing. No interviews, no follow-up. No one had looked twice at him, until now. The syndicate had long been rumored to operate along the waterfront, moving small packages in and out of the country, using unmarked vessels and legitimate fishing boats as cover. The case had dissolved quietly. Everyone involved had vanished, gone silent, or turned up dead. But now that cab number 157 had surfaced along with Frank's remains, detectives were suddenly seeing the old puzzle with new eyes. Was Frank Delgado just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or had he seen something, heard something, asked the wrong question? The paper trail was thin, but the timing was perfect. And the deeper they looked, the more it seemed like someone hadn't just gotten away with murder. Someone had gotten help. As detectives combed through the original files, something unsettling took shape. This wasn't just a cold case that fell through the cracks. This was a case that had been mishandled, perhaps even buried. Internal memos from 1992 revealed that Martin Graves had been mentioned multiple times by name, not just on the dispatch slip, but in early witness tips. One bartender claimed he saw Graves arguing with a cab driver outside the Black Coral the night Frank went missing. A dock worker remembered Graves loitering near the marina that same week. Those leads were never followed. A handwritten note in the margins of one report read simply, "No follow-up. Known troublemaker, not worth pursuing." Worse, the original surveillance footage from the Black Coral had been erased just weeks after the incident. Accidental overwrite, the file noted, but a separate internal request for preservation of the tape had been stamped and signed just days earlier. Someone had asked to keep it. Someone else had erased it anyway. Was it neglect? Understaffing? A system overwhelmed by a city growing too fast? Or was it something more deliberate? The Delgado family had waited 20 years for answers. But it wasn't just the killer who had kept Frank hidden. The system had helped. Whether by apathy or design, it had looked away. And now, with the truth clawing its way to the surface, the question wasn't just what happened. It was why no one had ever tried to stop it. The headlines reignited memories. Voices that had been silent for far too long. One retired bartender from a now-defunct dockside bar remembered Graves boasting after one too many drinks. "I can make someone disappear. I've done it before." At the time, it sounded like drunk bravado. Now it sounded like a confession. Another, an old dock worker with hands like driftwood, spoke in a low voice to detectives. "I saw him that night, the tall one, ball cap, by the South Pier, with a wrench in his hand. Pacing, looked like he was waiting for someone." That same night, Frank Delgado had picked up his final fare. Then came the most damning testimony of all, from inside a prison. One informant, newly released, told detectives that Graves had done a job for a cartel-linked smuggler in the early 90s. Something about a witness who heard the wrong exchange. "Not a snitch," the man said. "Just someone who got too curious. Got erased. It fit the timeline. It fit the location. It fit Frank. Graves, it turned out, hadn't vanished after 1993. He had moved. Changed his name. Lived quiet, small, and careful. But the truth doesn't rot like bodies do. It lingers, it waits. And now, it was rising to the surface. The marina had already given up one secret. Frank's cab, rusted and sunken, a time capsule preserved by cold, briny darkness. But detectives suspected it wasn't the only thing buried beneath those waves. Armed with sonar and a grid map of the bay, dive teams moved deeper, scanning silt beds and current-fed crevices surrounding where cab number 157 had been found. The water was colder now, murkier, like it didn't want to give anything else away, but it did. A few hundred feet from the original site, half buried in mud, they found a burner phone encased in a waterproof pouch. The SIM card was degraded, but the serial number traced back to a batch sold in Southern California in 1992. Then another object, a rusted pipe wrapped tightly in deteriorating cloth. The way it had been bound, sealed at both ends, suggested something more than scrap. Forensics would later confirm that traces of human blood were found on the fabric, too degraded for DNA, but undeniably human. In a deeper trench, divers recovered a cracked cab partition window. Forensics found hair embedded in the sealant. None of it was definitive. But together, it told a story: a quiet cab, a silent marina, a man who got in, and another who never got out. Whatever had happened to Frank Delgado, it hadn't been panic. It had been methodical, calculated, planned. The marina had kept its mouth shut for 20 years. Now, reluctantly, it was beginning to speak. Martin Graves was living under a different name, Michael Grant, in a quiet desert suburb outside Tucson, Arizona. A one-story house with gravel landscaping and sun-bleached blinds. He worked part-time at an auto body shop. No record in over a decade, but the past never stays buried. On the morning of November 3, 2012, U.S. Marshals arrived at the address with a warrant and a quiet urgency. There was no chase, no drama. Just a 61-year-old man in faded jeans stepping out of his garage with a cigarette tucked behind his ear. Martin Graves was arrested without incident. He said nothing as they cuffed him. No questions, no resistance. But at the station, once the charges were read, he broke his silence. "I don't know a Frank Delgado," he said. When shown a photo of the cab recovered from the bay, he didn't flinch. "Never seen that in my life." He was charged with second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and criminal concealment of a body. He pleaded not guilty. When asked for comment, Rosa only said, "God sees everything, even what's underwater." Graves was extradited to California within a week. No bail, no visitors. Just a man who had once bragged about making people disappear and now facing the full weight of a truth that had finally refused to stay buried. The trial began in late March 2013. National outlets picked it up. Reporters camped outside. Inside, the prosecution came out swinging. Forensic evidence from the cab, the rusted pipe, and the blood-stained skiff was presented with chilling clarity. Experts explained how the cab had likely been pushed from a boat under cover of night, that the driver's side seat had been moved back to fit someone taller, someone like Graves. But the turning point came from inside the jail itself. Two informants, both housed near Graves during pretrial detention, testified that he had spoken about the cab job, that he'd put down a nosy driver and left him where no one would find him. The defense argued hearsay, motivated by reduced sentences. But the damage was done. The jury listened, watched, took notes. In closing arguments, the prosecutor pointed to a blown-up photo of Frank's ID recovered from the cab. "He didn't just vanish," he said. "He was silenced, buried underwater like trash. And the man who did it sat in the back seat with a plan." After just 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned, guilty on all counts. Martin Graves showed no emotion, but in the back of the courtroom, Rosa finally bowed her head. Not in grief, in peace. Inside the courtroom, tension crackled like static. Rosa sat between her sons, hands clasped tight, wedding band still on her finger. Across the aisle, Graves sat expressionless, jaw clenched, arms folded. The clerk read the verdict aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Martin Graves, guilty of second-degree murder." The words dropped like an anchor. A beat of silence, then gasps, a choked sob, tears that had waited 2 decades to be shed. Inside, Rosa didn't cry, not yet. She just exhaled, eyes closed, as if releasing something she had been holding since 1992. As guards led Graves away, one of Frank's sons, now in his 30s, stood, shoulders shaking, and said softly, "He can't hurt anyone else." And for the first time in 20 years, that felt true. The courtroom was hushed as Rosa Delgado rose to deliver her victim impact statement. She held a folded piece of paper, worn thin from being read, reread, and cried over in the dark hours of the night. She looked at it once, then set it down. Frank wasn't just bones in a cab, she began, her voice steady. He was a man, a husband, a father. He loved breakfast with his boys. He danced in the kitchen when the Dodgers won. He never missed a Sunday mass or a school recital. He made people laugh even when he was tired, and he came home every night and until he didn't. I waited 20 years for someone to tell me what happened. 20 years of imagining if he was cold, if he was afraid, if he called out for us. Now I know he was silenced and hidden, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. She looked directly at Graves, who avoided her eyes. You tried to erase him, but he came back. And now everyone knows your name. Not because of what you built, but because of what you buried. When she sat down, even the judge looked away to blink back emotion. Closure had come. But peace, that would take longer. Because peace doesn't come from a verdict, it comes from remembering. And Rosa Delgado had never stopped doing that. The memorial wasn't grand. Just a simple bench installed at the edge of the marina, facing the bay. The same waters that had held him in silence for 20 years. The same waters that had at long last given him back, made of reclaimed wood and brushed steel, Weatherproof, quiet, like him. Engraved into the backrest, etched deep and clean, Frank Delgado. He always came home. People came, not in droves, but steadily. Former coworkers, strangers who'd followed the story, mothers who'd waited for phone calls that never came. They left flowers, baseball caps, handwritten notes, a child's drawing of a yellow cab taped under the plaque. Rosa came alone at dawn. She sat for a long time. No camera crews, no microphones, just the hum of gulls overhead, the soft slap of water against the dock. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. This wasn't a grave. This was something better. A place to remember. A place to finish the sentence that had gone unwritten for 2 decades. Frank had always come home. Not in the way she prayed. Not in the way the boys hoped. But he had come back. Not lost, not forgotten, just delayed. And now, the next chapter belonged to peace. Even now, years later, the marina never quite feels the same. It's cleaner, quieter, but the water still watches. Beneath its surface lie barnacled memories, corroded metal, unanswered questions. For every case that ends like Frank Delgado's, there are others that don't. Other benches that were never built. Other names that never made the paper. What else has the water kept? What else waits in the dark? A lost fisherman. A missing jogger. A girl last seen walking alone beneath the pier. Their stories hang in the fog that rolls in after midnight. Whispered through the rigging of docked sailboats. Carried in the silence between waves. Final hook. The payoff line. Frank's story reminds us of something painful, but important. Not all who vanish are gone. Not all who disappear are lost forever. And not every secret stays buried. Some arise. Some return. Some wait just beneath the surface. For someone to ask the right question. For someone like Rosa. Someone who refuses to forget. Someone who never stops watching the water until the water finally blinks. Frank Delgado's story ends here. But the bay still watches. And it still remembers.